The summer storm rolled across the prairie like a living thing, dark and hungry, swallowing the last traces of daylight as it descended upon Lone Mesa. Lightning split the sky in jagged white veins, illuminating the small ranch nestled against the foothills for brief, violent moments before plunging it back into darkness. Thunder followed close behind, shaking the earth with its primal roar. Caleb McAllister stood at the edge of his property, watching the approaching tempest with the calm of a man who had weathered worse storms than those made of wind and rain. At 32, he carried himself with the quiet strength of someone who had learned early that the world would take what it wanted, regardless of prayers or protests. His weathered hands gripped the fence post as the first fat drops of rain began to fall, each one hitting the dry earth with a small puff of dust. The horses in the corral were restless, their eyes wide and white-rimmed as they circled and whinnied. Caleb knew that look, the same wild fear that had been in Martha's eyes during her final hours, when the fever had taken hold and wouldn't let go. 3 years had passed since he'd buried her behind the house, along with the child who never drew breath, but storms still brought her back to him. Not her voice or her touch, but the memory of helplessness, of standing by while nature took its course. He shook his head, pushing the thoughts away. The horses needed tending. That was real, immediate, something he could control. He grabbed the rope from the fence post and headed toward the corral, his boots squelching in the rapidly forming mud. "Easy now, easy," he murmured to the lead mare, a chestnut named Belle, who usually responded to his voice. But tonight she was all nerves, dancing away from his approach. The rain was coming harder now, turning from scattered drops to sheets that slanted across the ranch like gray curtains. That's when he saw her. At first, he thought it was a trick of the lightning, a shadow where no shadow should be, moving along the main road that led to his gate. But the next flash revealed a figure, small and bent against the storm, struggling forward with something clutched to their chest. Caleb squinted through the rain, watching as the figure stumbled, caught themselves, then stumbled again. His first instinct was caution. Lone Mesa was a day's ride from the nearest town, and folks who showed up unannounced during storms were rarely bearing good news. Could be someone running from the law, or worse, someone looking for easy prey. But as the figure drew closer, nearly falling at his gate, Caleb saw what he was dealing with: a woman, soaked through to the skin, her dark hair plastered to her face like seaweed. She fumbled with the gate latch, her fingers slipping on the wet metal. Caleb found himself moving before he'd made a conscious decision, crossing the yard in long strides. Up close, he could see she was young, maybe 25, though it was hard to tell with the rain and exhaustion etching lines into her face. Her dress, once blue or gray, was now the color of storm clouds, clinging to her thin frame. She clutched a canvas bag to her chest like it held everything she owned, which, Caleb suspected, it probably did. "Ma'am," he had to raise his voice over the storm. "Ma'am, you all right?" She looked up at him then, and he saw eyes the color of winter sky, pale blue, almost gray, and filled with a wariness that went bone deep. Blood seeped from a cut on her ankle, mixing with the rainwater to create pale pink rivulets that disappeared into the mud. Her voice was barely above a whisper, hoarse like she'd been calling out for help with no one to hear. "I just need somewhere for the night. I'll be gone come morning." Another crash of thunder made her flinch, and Caleb saw how her whole body trembled, not just from cold, but from something deeper. He'd seen that kind of shaking before, in horses that had been ridden too hard for too long. "Come on," he said, making the decision that would change everything, though he didn't know it then. "Let's get you inside." She hesitated, studying his face like she was trying to read his intentions in the lines around his eyes. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded once and let him guide her toward the house. The ranch house wasn't much, 2 rooms and a kitchen, built by Caleb's own hands with help from neighbors who were gone now. moved on to California, or claimed by the same unforgiving land that had claimed Martha. But it was solid, with thick walls that kept out the worst of the weather and a stone fireplace that could warm a body down to its bones. Caleb pushed open the door and ushered her inside, immediately moving to stoke the dying embers in the fireplace. The woman stood just inside the threshold, dripping steadily onto the wooden floor, still clutching her bag. "There's towels in that chest," he said, nodding toward the corner. "And I can heat some water if you want to clean that cut on your ankle." "I'm fine," she said quickly, too quickly. "I don't need—" "You're bleeding on my floor," Caleb interrupted, but not unkindly. "And you're like to catch your death standing there soaked through. Now, I ain't asking for your life story, but I am asking you to take care of yourself while you're under my roof." Something in his tone, firm but not threatening, seemed to reach her. She set her bag down carefully, never taking her eyes off it, and accepted the towel he offered, as she dabbed at her face and hair. Caleb busied himself with the fire, adding kindling until the flames caught properly and heat began to push back the storm's chill. "Name's Caleb McAllister," he said, filling the kettle from the water barrel. "This is my place." She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, so soft he almost missed it. Lona Hartley." "Well, Miss Hartley, you picked quite a night for traveling." He set the kettle on its hook over the fire. "Storm's been building all day. Most folks could see it coming." "I could see it," she said, and there was something in her voice, not defiance exactly, but a kind of resigned acceptance. "Sometimes you don't get to choose when you leave." Caleb nodded slowly, understanding more than she probably intended to reveal. He'd known plenty of people who'd had to leave in a hurry, for reasons they'd rather not discuss. The frontier was full of them. While the water heated, he gathered supplies, clean cloth for bandages, the bottle of whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes, a bar of lye soap Martha had made that he'd never had the heart to use. When he turned back, Lona had settled into the chair by the fire, though she sat on its edge like a bird ready to take flight. "Let me see that ankle," he said, kneeling beside her with the supplies. She pulled back instinctively, then seemed to force herself to stillness. Slowly, she lifted the hem of her sodden skirt just enough to reveal the injury. The cut wasn't deep, but it was ugly, ragged edges that spoke of rough terrain traveled in desperation. Caleb worked in silence, cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. Ranch life taught a man to tend injuries, his own and his animals. Lona sat rigid, her jaw clenched against any sound of pain. Only when he poured the whiskey over the cut did she make a noise, a sharp intake of breath quickly suppressed. "There," he said, tying off the bandage. "That should hold you." "Thank you," she whispered, and he heard tears in her voice, though none fell from her eyes. The kettle began to whistle, and Caleb busied himself making tea, simple chamomile that Martha had dried the summer before she died. He pressed a cup into Lona's hands, noting how they shook as she wrapped them around the warmth. For the first time since she'd arrived, something in her seemed to ease, just a fraction. She breathed in the steam, closed her eyes, and for a moment looked younger than whatever hard years had aged her. Outside, the storm raged on, wind howling around the corners of the house like something trying to find its way in. But inside, there was warmth and light and the quiet comfort of tea drunk in company. Caleb settled into his own chair, content to let the silence stretch between them. He'd learned long ago that some stories couldn't be pushed. They had to emerge on their own time, like flowers after a hard winter. As Lona sipped her tea, her bag shifted slightly where she'd set it, and something fell out, a photograph, torn down the middle. Before she could grab it, Caleb caught a glimpse of a small child standing in front of what might have been a house, though the image was too damaged to be sure. Lona snatched it up, pressing it to her chest with a look of pure panic. "I'm sorry," she said, though Caleb wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. "Nothing to be sorry for," he said quietly. "We all carry things we don't want to lose." She looked at him then. really looked at him, and he saw recognition in her eyes, not of him personally, but of a kindred spirit, someone who understood the weight of loss. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse. The thunder now almost continuous, the lightning turning night into stuttering day. But inside the small ranch house, two souls sat by the fire, separated by their secrets but united in their need for shelter from more than just the rain. The fire crackled and spit, sending small sparks up the chimney as another gust of wind rattled the windows. Lona Hartley sat perfectly still, the cup of tea cooling in her hands, her eyes fixed on some point beyond the flames. Caleb could see the war playing out behind those pale eyes, the need for shelter battling against every instinct that told her to keep moving, keep running, never stop long enough for anyone to get a good look. "I won't be any trouble," she said suddenly, as if continuing a conversation they'd been having in her head. "Just need to dry out, wait for the storm to pass. Come morning, I'll be on my way." "Storm like this could last days," Caleb observed, refilling his own cup from the pot. "Roads'll be nothing but mud, dangerous for traveling, especially alone." Her fingers tightened on the cup. "I've managed worse." He didn't doubt it. Everything about her spoke of hard traveling, the worn boots barely holding together. The dress mended so many times the original pattern was lost. The way she held herself like she expected to bolt at any moment. But it was more than that. It was the careful way she'd positioned herself in the chair, back to the wall, facing the door. The way her eyes tracked every movement he made, cataloging exits and potential weapons. "I ain't asking where you're going," Caleb said carefully. "That's your business. But this storm's a killer. Seen it take down full-grown men who thought they could push through. You're welcome to the barn if the house makes you uncomfortable, but I won't have you heading back out in this weather. My conscience won't allow it." She looked at him sharply, searching for the trap in his words. "Your conscience," she repeated, and there was something bitter in her tone. "Don't trouble your conscience on my account. Mr. McAllister, I've been taking care of myself for a long time now." "I can see that." He kept his voice neutral, non-threatening. "Doesn't mean you have to do it tonight." The wind chose that moment to slam something against the side of the house, a loose shutter, maybe, or a piece of fencing torn free. Lona flinched hard, tea sloshing over the rim of her cup onto her already wet dress. She set it down with shaking hands, anger at her own reaction clear on her face. "I can pay," she said suddenly, reaching for her bag. "I have a little money." "Keep it." The sharpness in his voice made her freeze. Caleb took a breath, gentled his tone. "Sorry, that's not necessary. I'm not running a hotel here, just offering basic Christian charity to someone caught in a storm. In my experience, Christian charity usually comes with a price," she said quietly. "Then you've been meeting the wrong Christians." That actually drew something that might have been a smile, though it disappeared so quickly he couldn't be sure. She picked up her cup again, seemed to realize it was empty, set it back down. "Are you hungry?" Caleb asked. "I've got some stew left from dinner. Nothing fancy, but it's filling." "I couldn't." "When's the last time you ate?" The question hung between them. Lona's jaw worked like she was chewing on a lie, then decided against it. "Yesterday morning, maybe the morning before. Days run together on the road." Caleb stood without another word and moved to the kitchen area. The stew pot still sat on the back of the stove. Kept warm by the banked coals, he ladled a generous portion into a bowl, cut a thick slice from the bread loaf, and brought both to her. She stared at the food like it might disappear if she reached for it too quickly. Then, with visible effort to maintain some dignity, she picked up the spoon and took a small bite. Her eyes closed briefly, and Caleb saw her throat work as she swallowed. "Thank you," she whispered. He returned to his chair, giving her space to eat without observation. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the ranch, but inside the only sounds were the fire's crackle and the soft clink of spoon against bowl. Your horses, Lona said suddenly. They're still out in this. Caleb cursed under his breath. In the surprise of finding her at his gate, he'd completely forgotten about getting the animals to shelter. They're tough stock, but you're right. They need to be in the barn. He was already reaching for his coat when she stood. I'll help. You don't need to. I know horses, she said firmly. Worked in stables since I was young. I can help. There was something in her voice, a need to not be beholden, to earn her keep even for one night. Caleb understood that kind of pride. It was sometimes all a person had left. All right, he said. There's an oilskin on that hook that might fit you. It'll keep the worst of the rain off. She pulled on the coat, which swallowed her small frame, and followed him back into the storm. The wind hit them like a physical force, driving rain horizontally across the yard. Caleb led the way to the corral, where the horses milled in agitated circles, their coats dark with rain. What happened next surprised him. Lona moved among the frightened animals with a confidence that seemed at odds with her earlier nervousness. She spoke to them in a low, steady voice, her hands sure and gentle as she caught hold of Belle's halter. The mare, who had been shying away from Caleb earlier, calmed almost immediately under her touch. Working together, they led the horses to the barn, a solid structure that Caleb had reinforced just last month. Thank God. Once inside, Lona moved efficiently, checking each animal for injury, adjusting blankets, measuring out feed. Her movements were practiced, automatic, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she seemed to forget to be afraid. You weren't lying about knowing horses, Caleb observed, watching her work. Only job I could get when I was 12, she said, running her hands along a gelding's legs, checking for swelling. Man who ran the stable didn't ask questions if you could do the work. Didn't matter if you were a runaway or... She cut herself off, suddenly remembering who she was talking to. Or what? Caleb asked gently. She straightened, not meeting his eyes. Or nothing, just meant it was honest work for someone who needed it. They finished settling the horses in companionable silence. The barn was warm and dry, filled with the comforting sounds of animals munching hay and shifting in their stalls. Caleb found himself reluctant to return to the house and whatever walls Lona would rebuild once they were back inside. That mare, Lona said suddenly, nodding toward Belle. She's carrying... Caleb looked closer and felt like a fool for missing it. You're right. Must be fairly early still. 6 weeks, maybe 8. You'll want to watch her when the weather turns cold. Sometimes they have trouble if their first winter pregnant is a hard one. I'll keep that in mind, he said, impressed despite himself. You really do know your horses. Something shifted in her expression, pride warring with pain. Had a good teacher, she said softly. Before, again, she stopped herself. We should get back, Caleb said, sparing her from finishing the thought. You're shivering. They ran back through the rain, Lona struggling to keep up with his longer strides. By the time they reached the house, they were both soaked anew despite the oilskins. Caleb stoked the fire higher while Lona stood uncertainly by the door, water pooling at her feet. There's dry clothes in that trunk, he said, nodding toward the bedroom. They were my wife's. She was about your size. Take whatever fits. Lona's eyes widened. I couldn't... They're doing no one any good sitting in that trunk, he said firmly. Martha would have wanted them put to use. She hesitated another moment, then picked up her bag and disappeared into the bedroom. Caleb busied himself making more tea, trying not to think about another woman wearing Martha's clothes. It was practical. Nothing more. Martha would have scolded him for letting pride keep someone in wet clothes. When Lona emerged, she was wearing a simple gray dress that Martha had favored for everyday wear. It fit her well enough, though she was thinner than Martha had been, even at the end. She'd braided her wet hair back from her face, revealing delicate features marked by exhaustion and something else old pain, the kind that settled into a person's bones. Thank you, she said. I'll wash and return them before I go." "No need," Caleb said. "Like I said, they're not doing anyone any good in that trunk." She settled back into the chair by the fire, her bag at her feet. Whatever ease she'd found in the barn was gone, replaced by that watchful wariness. Caleb poured fresh tea and returned to his own seat, content to let the silence stretch. Sometimes the best thing you could offer someone was the space to not explain themselves. The storm raged on, showing no signs of weakening. Lightning illuminated the windows in stark flashes, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. But inside, the fire held the darkness at bay, creating a small circle of warmth and light in which two strangers sat, each nursing their own private griefs, finding an unexpected moment of peace in shared solitude. The evening deepened, and with it came a strange domesticity that neither of them had expected. Caleb set about preparing a simple supper cornbread and the remains of the stew, with preserved peaches he'd been saving for Sunday. He moved around the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd grown used to doing for himself, while Lona remained by the fire, her presence both there and not there, like a shadow that might disappear if he looked at it too directly. "You don't have to feed me again," she said when he began setting the table. "The tea is more than enough." "Maybe so," Caleb replied, placing 2 plates on the scarred wooden surface. "But my mama raised me to never eat in front of company. Since you're here, we might as well share a proper meal." She rose reluctantly, bringing her bag with her. Even at the table, she kept it close, one hand resting on its worn surface like it was an anchor keeping her from drifting away. They ate in silence at first, the only sounds the scrape of spoons on plates and the continuous drumming of rain on the roof. Caleb found himself studying her in quick glances, in the lamplight, with Martha's dress and her hair pulled back. She looked younger than he'd first thought, but there were lines around her eyes that spoke of hard-earned wisdom, and her hands, though small, bore the calluses of someone who'd done more than her share of manual labor. "This is good," she said suddenly, gesturing to the cornbread. "Better than good, actually. Secrets in the bacon grease," Caleb admitted, "and a touch of honey when you can get it." "My mother used to make it with molasses," Lona said, then seemed startled by her own words. "When we had it, anyway." It was the first truly personal thing she'd offered, and Caleb was careful not to make too much of it. "Mine too. Said it made it stick to your ribs better." Never was sure what that meant exactly, but it sounded important. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Everything sounds important when you're young, like the whole world's full of secrets the grown folks are keeping. Then you grow up and realize they were just making it up as they went along, same as you are now." This time the smile stayed a moment longer. "That's the truth of it." They continued eating, the atmosphere warming slightly. Caleb reached for the water pitcher at the same moment Lona moved her bag, and somehow, in the motion, the bag tipped. Its contents spilled across the table: a few coins, a broken comb, a small sewing kit, and the torn photograph. Lona made a sound like a wounded animal, scrambling to gather everything back, but the photograph had fallen face up, and Caleb couldn't help but see it clearly this time. A small boy, maybe 5 or 6, standing in front of a wooden structure. The torn edge suggested someone else had been in the picture once, but only the child remained, smiling gap-toothed at whoever held the camera. "I'm sorry," Lona whispered, clutching the photograph to her chest. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide with something between panic and grief. "No need to apologize," Caleb said gently. "Pictures have a way of falling out when they want to be seen." She stared at him, tears gathering but not falling. "He was—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "His name was Samuel, Sammy. He liked to catch fireflies in summer, put them in jars and pretend they were fairy lights." Her voice broke on the last word. Caleb didn't ask what happened to Sammy. The past tense told him enough. Instead, he rose and moved to a shelf near the window, reaching for something he hadn't touched in months. He returned with his own photograph, Martha in her wedding dress, looking serious and beautiful and heartbreakingly young. "Martha," he said simply, placing it on the table between them. "3 years ago this September, fever took her, and the baby she was carrying." Lona looked at the photograph, then at him, and something shifted in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or just the relief of being in the presence of someone who understood the particular weight of loss. "How do you stand it?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "The quiet. I mean, after they're gone." Caleb considered the question, one he'd asked himself countless times in the small hours of the morning. "Some days I don't. Some days the quiet's so loud it drives me out to work until I can't think anymore. But other days," he paused, searching for the right words, "other days I can hear her humming in the kitchen or laughing at something foolish I said. The quiet's not empty, exactly. It's full of echoes." Lona nodded slowly, still holding Sammy's picture. "The house burned," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. "I was working late at the stables. When I came home, the whole sky was orange. Neighbors tried to stop me from going in, but I could hear him crying. I tried," her voice caught. "I tried, but the smoke was so thick, and the heat. They had to drag me out. The last thing I heard was him calling for me." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and terrible. Caleb didn't offer platitudes about how it wasn't her fault or how Sammy was in a better place now. He'd heard all those words after Martha died, and they'd been as useful as dust. Instead, he said, "That's a weight no one should carry alone." "Been carrying it for 2 years now," she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Gets heavier, not lighter, no matter what people say about time healing." "People say a lot of things that aren't true. Time doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to walk with a limp." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the wariness in her eyes eased. They sat there in the lamplight, two people who'd lost everything that mattered, finding an unexpected comfort in shared understanding. The storm outside seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, settling from its earlier fury into a steady, drumming rain. Caleb cleared the dishes while Lona carefully tucked Sammy's photograph back into her bag, handling it like the precious thing it was. "I should let you get some rest," Lona said, standing. "The barn will be—" "You'll take the bedroom," Caleb interrupted. "I'll bed down out here by the fire." "I can't put you out of your own bed." "You're not putting me out. I sleep out here half the time anyway. Bed's too, he paused, not wanting to say empty. "Too soft," he finished lamely. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you. For everything. The food, the clothes, the—" She gestured helplessly. "The listening. Sometimes that's all we can do for each other," Caleb said. She gathered her bag and moved toward the bedroom, pausing in the doorway. "Mr. McAllister, what you said about echoes, does it ever get easier hearing them without breaking?" Caleb thought of Martha's laugh, of the way she used to hum while she cooked, of all the small sounds that still haunted this house. "I'll let you know when I find out," he said honestly. She nodded, understanding more in that admission than in any comfort he could have offered, and disappeared into the bedroom. Caleb heard the soft click of the door closing, then the creak of the bed as she settled in. He made himself a pallet by the fire, using old blankets that smelled of horse and leather and honest work, as he lay there listening to the rain and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. He thought about the strange turns life could take. This morning he'd woken to an empty house and the prospect of another day exactly like the one before. Now there was a woman wearing Martha's dress sleeping in his bed, carrying griefs that matched his own in shape, if not in detail. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She'd been clear about leaving come morning, and he had no right to ask her to stay. But for tonight, at least, neither of them had to be alone with their ghosts. In a world that seemed determined to take everything good and gentle, That was no small mercy. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls, somewhere in the darkness beyond the windows. The storm continued its journey across the prairie, but inside the small ranch house, two wounded souls had found a moment's refuge, and for now, that was enough. The night crawled toward dawn with agonizing slowness. Caleb dozed fitfully by the dying fire, starting awake at every shift in the wind, every creak of the house settling. It wasn't worry about Lona that kept him restless. Somehow he knew she posed no threat. It was the strange awareness of another presence in his home, the first since Martha's passing. The house felt different with her in it, as if the walls themselves were remembering what it meant to shelter more than one soul. He must have finally fallen into deeper sleep near dawn, because he woke to find pale light filtering through the windows and the rain reduced to a gentle patter. The storm had blown itself out during the night, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. Caleb sat up, working the kinks from his back, and noticed the bedroom door was open. Panic flared briefly had she left already, but then he heard movement from the kitchen and smelled coffee brewing. He found Lona there, moving quietly about, having already stoked the stove and set water to boiling. "I hope you don't mind," she said without turning around. "I couldn't sleep, and I thought, well, coffee seemed like the least I could do." "Don't mind at all," Caleb said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Can't remember the last time I woke to someone else making coffee." She poured 2 cups, her movements careful and precise. In the morning light, wearing Martha's dress with her hair still braided back, she looked both younger and older than the night before. The shadows under her eyes spoke of little sleep, but there was a calmness to her that hadn't been there yesterday. They stood in the kitchen drinking coffee in companionable silence, watching through the window as the sun broke through the remaining clouds, setting the wet world to sparkling. The yard was a mess of puddles and debris, but the air had that fresh-washed clarity that only came after storms. "I should go," Lona said finally, setting down her cup. "Check on the horses before I leave. Make sure they weathered the night all right." Caleb nodded, though something in his chest tightened at the words. They walked to the barn together, their boots squelching in the mud. Inside, the horses were calm, munching hay as if storms were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Lona moved among them with the same sure touch as the night before, checking each one carefully. "They're fine," she pronounced, giving Belle's neck a final pat. "That mare's going to give you a beautiful foal come spring." "You'll have to come back and see it," Caleb said without thinking, then immediately regretted the words. Her face had closed off again, that wariness creeping back into her eyes. "I won't be coming back," she said quietly. "I never go back to places." They returned to the house in silence. Lona gathered her few belongings, folding the borrowed nightgown carefully and leaving it on the bed. She changed back into her own dress, which had dried by the fire overnight, and suddenly she was the same bedraggled traveler who'd appeared at his gate, as if the night of shared grief and understanding had been nothing but a dream. She stood by the door, bag in hand, looking uncertain for the first time since announcing her departure. The morning sun slanted through the windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air between them. "Thank you," she said formally, "for the shelter and the food and everything. I won't forget your kindness." "Where will you go?" Caleb asked, though he knew he had no right to the answer. "West," she said vaguely. "Maybe California. Heard there's work there for those willing to do it." "That's a hard journey for anyone, especially alone." "I've been alone for 2 years," she said, lifting her chin. "I can manage." They stood there, the moment stretching taut between them. Caleb could see she was working up to something, the way her fingers tightened on the bag's handle, the way she took a breath as if preparing to dive into deep water. "Mr. McAllister," she began, then stopped, started again. "Caleb, I want to—" She paused, frustration flickering across her face. I don't have words for what you gave me last night. Not just the roof and the food, but the understanding, the space to speak Sammy's name without judgment or pity. You don't owe me anything, Caleb said gently. I know that, but I want to give you something anyway. A trade. Maybe. A thank you. Just. She stepped closer, and he could see her trembling, though whether from cold or emotion he couldn't tell. Just one kiss, then I'll leave. Something to remember that for one night, neither of us was alone. The request hung in the air like morning mist, delicate and surprising. Caleb felt his heart stumble in his chest. It had been 3 years since anyone had touched him with tenderness. 3 years of careful distance from anything that might crack the shell he'd built around his grief. You don't have to, he began. I know, she interrupted. That's why I can ask. She set down her bag and stepped closer still, rising up on her toes. Her hand touched his face, feather-light, and then her lips brushed his not with passion or desperation, but with a gentleness that nearly undid him. It was a kiss that tasted of sorrow and coffee and unspoken possibilities. A kiss that said goodbye before anything had really begun. When she pulled back, there were tears on her cheeks. Thank you, she whispered again, and turned toward the door. That's when Caleb made the decision that would change everything. As her hand touched the door handle, he reached past her and turned the lock. No, he said quietly. She spun around, fear flashing in her eyes. What are you doing? I'm not keeping you prisoner, he said, pulling the key from the lock and setting it on the table between them. But I am asking you to think. The roads are washed out, probably impassable. You have no horse, no supplies for a journey to California. You're running on grief and stubbornness. And while I respect both, they're poor traveling companions. You can't just... The door's not locked against you leaving, Caleb interrupted gently. It's locked against you running without thinking it through. Take the key if you want. Walk out right now. But I'm asking you to consider staying just a few more days, until the road's dry, until you can gather proper supplies. Why? The word came out broken. Why do you care what happens to me? Caleb thought of Martha, of how she'd always taken in stray cats, dogs, even a 3-legged raccoon once. She would have opened her arms to this wounded woman without hesitation. But that wasn't the whole truth of why he was standing here, blocking the door with his body, if not with the lock. Because I know what it's like to run from ghosts, he said finally. And I know they follow you no matter how far you go. But maybe if you stay still for a while, they might settle enough for you to make peace with them. And if they don't, then at least you'll be rested and supplied when you face them again. Lona stared at him, then at the key on the table. Her hand hovered over it, trembling. The morning sun climbed higher, streaming through the windows, illuminating the dust and debris of 2 lives knocked off course by loss. I can't, she whispered. I can't stay. Every time I stay somewhere, something terrible happens. I'm cursed. Don't you understand everyone I care about? Then don't care about me, Caleb said simply. Just stay. Help with the horses. Sleep in a warm bed. Eat regular meals. Not for me, but for yourself. When's the last time you did something just because you deserved kindness? The question seemed to break something in her. She sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. I don't know, she admitted, the words muffled. I don't remember. Caleb moved the key closer to her, then stepped back. The choice is yours. It always will be. But know that if you stay, it's not charity and it's not pity. It's just 2 people who understand loss helping each other remember what it means to live again. She looked up at him then, mascara streaked with tears, and he saw the war still raging behind her eyes. But he also saw something else, a tiny spark of hope, fragile as a newborn flame. Just a few days, she asked. Just until the road's clear, he agreed. Then you can go wherever you need to go, with supplies and a clear conscience. She reached for the key, held it in her palm like it might burn her. Then, slowly, she set it back on the table. "All right," she whispered. "A few days." Outside, the sun broke fully through the clouds, bathing the ranch in golden light, and inside, two people stood on the precipice of something neither quite understood yet not love, perhaps, but the possibility of healing. It was a small thing, as fragile as morning frost, but in a world that had taken so much from both of them, it was also everything. The moment stretched between them like a taut wire. Lona still staring at the key on the table as if it might transform into something else, a snake, perhaps, or a chain. Her fingers trembled as she pulled them back into her lap, and Caleb could see the effort it took for her not to snatch it up and bolt for the door. "I don't understand you," she said finally, her voice rough with unshed tears. "Any other man would have—" She stopped, shook her head. "Why aren't you like them?" "Like who?" Caleb asked, though he suspected he knew. "Like the ones who see a woman alone and think she's theirs for the taking. Like the ones who offer help with one hand while the other's already reaching." Her jaw tightened. "Like my husband was." The word "was" hung in the air, and Caleb filed it away with all the other pieces of her story she'd accidentally revealed. He moved to the stove, buying them both time by pouring fresh coffee. "Maybe I'm selfish in my own way," he said finally. "This house has been quiet for 3 years. Having someone here who understands that particular kind of quiet, maybe I need that as much as you need a place to rest." Lona laughed, but it was a brittle sound. "You're asking for trouble, Mr. McAllister. I told you everyone I care about ends up hurt. It's like I carry disaster with me." "Seems to me disaster finds us all, whether we invite it or not." Caleb said, "Martha never did anything but love me and tend her garden, and fever took her anyway. Your boy didn't die because you cursed him. He died because sometimes terrible things happen to good people." "You don't know that," she whispered. "You don't know what I've done." "No," he agreed. "And I'm not asking. Your past is your own, just like mine is. All I'm offering is a few days of present, no questions, no judgments, just time." She stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The morning sun caught in her hair, turning the dark strands to copper. "I can't stay in the house. If I'm staying, and I'm not saying I am, but if I do, it has to be in the barn. I need to be able to leave, without locked doors or kindness I haven't earned." Caleb considered this. "There's a tack room in the barn. Has a cot and a stove. I use it during foaling season. You're welcome to it." She turned to face him, surprise flickering across her features. "You'd let me stay in your barn?" "I'd let you stay wherever you're comfortable. House, barn, hell. You could pitch a tent in the yard if that's what you need. The offer's not about where you sleep, Lona. It's about giving you time to catch your breath." "And what do you get out of it?" The suspicion was back in her voice, sharp as broken glass. Caleb thought about lying, about making up some story about needing help with the horses or the house. But something about her demanded honesty, even when it was uncomfortable. "Company," he said simply. "Someone to share coffee with in the morning. Someone who doesn't look at me with pity when I stare too long at an empty chair. Maybe that's selfish, but it's the truth." She studied him for a long moment, and he had the feeling she was seeing past his words to something deeper. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her, because the tension in her shoulders eased slightly. "The tack room," she said finally. "I'll stay there, and I'll really work. I won't be a charity case. Never thought you were. And when the roads are clear, I go. No arguments, no more locked doors." "Agreed." "And—" She hesitated, then forged ahead. "And we don't talk about the kiss. It was a moment of gratitude. Nothing more." Caleb nodded, though he could still feel the ghost of her lips against his. "Whatever you need it to be." They spent the rest of the morning establishing a strange new rhythm. Caleb showed her the tack room, which was cleaner than most bunkhouses, with a small window that looked out over the paddock. Lona set her meager belongings on the cot with the same care she might have used to arrange furniture in a palace. "It's perfect," she said, and he could tell she meant it. The room was small enough to not feel exposed, but with easy access to the door. A refuge that wasn't a trap. They worked together to clear the storm debris from the yard, falling into an easy pattern that surprised them both. Lona was stronger than she looked, hefting fallen branches without complaint, her movements efficient and purposeful. When they stopped for water, Caleb caught her almost smiling at Belle, who had come to the fence to investigate. "She likes you," he observed. "Animals are easier than people," Lona replied, stroking the mare's nose. "They don't lie, and they don't pretend kindness they don't mean." "Is that what you think I'm doing, pretending?" She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw the confusion in her eyes. "I don't know what you're doing," she admitted. "That's what scares me." They went back to work, but her words lingered. As the day wore on, Caleb found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, the way she hummed tunelessly while she worked, the gentle way she handled the tools, the moments when she'd pause and look west, as if calculating distances. Lunch was a simple affair of bread and cheese eaten standing in the barn, watching the horses. Lona had relaxed enough to tell him about some of the horses she'd known, careful to keep the stories free of personal details. But Caleb could read between the lines a childhood spent in stables because home wasn't safe, a talent for gentling difficult horses because she understood what it meant to be frightened. "There was this one stallion," she was saying, "mean as a snake and twice as quick. Owner wanted him put down, said he was too dangerous, but I could see it in his eyes he wasn't mean, just scared. Someone had hurt him bad, and he'd decided never to let anyone close enough to do it again." "What happened to him?" A shadow crossed her face. "I got him to trust me. Took months, but finally he'd come when I called. Let me ride him even. Then one day I came to work and he was gone. Owner had sold him to a man who wanted a horse with spirit." Her voice turned bitter. "Last I heard, they'd broken that spirit real good." "I'm sorry," Caleb said, understanding she was talking about more than just a horse. "Yeah, well," she shrugged, but he could see the old pain in the gesture. "That's what happens when you trust the wrong people. You get broken or sold or—" She cut herself off, turning away. The afternoon brought clouds building on the horizon, though nothing like the previous night's storm. They finished the most urgent repairs, and as the sun began to sink, Caleb started dinner while Lona tended the horses. He could hear her through the window, talking to them in that low, soothing voice. When she came in for supper, there was straw in her hair and a smudge of dirt on her cheek. She looked more real, more present than she had since arriving. They ate in comfortable silence, the earlier tension replaced by something that wasn't quite ease but was at least bearable. "I'll help you clear up," she offered when they'd finished. "No need. You've done plenty today." But she insisted, and they found themselves standing side by side at the wash basin, him washing, her drying. It was such a simple and domestic scene that it made Caleb's chest ache. How many evenings had he and Martha spent just like this? "You all right?" Lona asked, and he realized he'd stopped moving, a plate forgotten in his hands. "Yeah," he said, forcing himself back to the present. "Just remembering." She nodded, understanding without explanation. The little moments are the worst, aren't they? The ordinary things that suddenly aren't ordinary anymore because there's no one to share them with. "That's exactly it." They finished the dishes in contemplative silence. When the last plate was put away, Lona turned to go. "Thank you," she said at the door, "for letting me stay. For not—" She gestured vaguely. "For not making it harder than it is." "Get some rest," Caleb said. "Tomorrow we'll need to check the fencing on the north pasture. Storm probably took some of it down." She nodded and slipped out into the gathering dusk. Caleb watched her cross to the barn, her figure quickly swallowed by shadows. The key still sat on the table where she'd left it, and after a moment's thought, he picked it up and hung it back on its hook by the door. She could leave whenever she wanted. He'd made that clear, but something told him that for the first time in 2 years, Lona Hartley might choose to stay, at least for a little while, and in his quiet house, with the ghosts of memory for company. Caleb McAllister found himself hoping she would. Days passed in a rhythm neither of them had expected. Lona rose with the sun, tending the horses before Caleb even made coffee. He'd find her in the barn, brushing Belle's coat until it gleamed, speaking softly to the mare about things he couldn't quite hear. She worked like someone who'd forgotten what it meant to rest, throwing herself into every task with fierce determination. On the third night, over a dinner of rabbit stew and cornbread, the walls she'd built began to show cracks. "Sammy would have loved this place," she said suddenly, then looked startled at her own words. "I'm sorry. I don't mean to—" "Don't apologize," Caleb said. "Speaking their names isn't a betrayal. Sometimes it's the only way to keep them close." She pushed a piece of potato around her plate, considering he was fascinated by horses, used to beg me to take him to the stables where I worked. The owner didn't like it, said children were a distraction, but sometimes I'd sneak him in early, before anyone else arrived. A small smile touched her lips. He'd named every horse there, even the ones that already had names. Said the ones people gave them weren't right. "Martha was like that with the barn cats," Caleb offered. "We had one old Tom everyone called Patches, but she insisted his real name was Professor Wellington. Said he had the bearing of an educated man." Lona actually laughed at that, a rusty sound like a gate that hadn't been opened in too long. Sammy would have agreed. He said animals told him their true names if you listened hard enough. "How old was he?" Caleb asked gently. 6. He'd have been 8 now. Her voice caught. "He was scared of the dark, but trying so hard to be brave about it. The night of the fire, I'd promised to buy him a new lamp with my wages, one of those fancy ones with the painted glass shade. He'd seen it in the store window." She trailed off, lost in the memory. Caleb waited, having learned that silence could be its own form of comfort. "Thomas, my husband, had been drinking again," she continued, her voice flat. "He got mean when he drank. Not violent, usually, just cruel. Said things that cut deep. That night he told Sammy that being afraid of the dark made him weak, less of a man." She laughed bitterly. "A 6-year-old boy, and Thomas was worried about him being a man. Is that why you were working late?" She nodded. "I took extra shifts whenever I could, saving money to leave, to take Sammy somewhere safe. Thomas didn't know about the money. I hid it in a jar buried behind the henhouse." She paused, then added quietly, "It's probably still there. Never did get to use it." The lamp flickered between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, an owl called, lonely in the darkness. "The fire," Caleb prompted gently. "Do you know how it started?" Lona's hands tightened on her cup. "Thomas fell asleep smoking. Neighbors saw him stumble out, coughing and retching. He was so drunk he didn't even remember Sammy was inside until I got there." Her voice turned hard. "He was standing in the yard, watching it burn, when I arrived, just standing there." "Where is he now?" "Dead," she said simply. "Tried to stop me from going in after Sammy. I fought him, clawed at his face, bit his hand, finally got past him, but—" She shuddered. "The smoke was so thick, I could hear Sammy crying, calling for me, but I couldn't find his room. Everything looked different in the dark and the smoke. Then part of the ceiling came down, and the neighbors pulled me out." Tears ran down her face now, but she didn't seem to notice. "They held me back while my baby burned, held me down in the mud while I screamed his name. And Thomas just kept saying it wasn't his fault, that the boy should have gotten himself out." "What happened to Thomas?" "Heart gave out 2 months later. Doctor said it was the smoke damage, but I think it was guilt. Either way, I didn't mourn him." She wiped her face with rough movements. After that, I couldn't stay. Everywhere I looked, I saw Sammy. Every child's laugh sounded like his. So I started walking and just never stopped. Until now, Caleb said softly. She looked up at him, surprised. I suppose so. 3 days is the longest I've stayed anywhere since then. How does it feel? Terrifying, she admitted. Like I'm tempting fate. Like if I get comfortable, something will happen to you too. I'm not a child who needs protecting, Caleb pointed out. And this ranch has weathered worse than one woman's supposed curse. You don't understand. I understand plenty, he interrupted, surprising them both with his firmness. I understand that you've been punishing yourself for 2 years for something that wasn't your fault. I understand that you've convinced yourself that moving keeps the pain at bay, when all it does is exhaust you. And I understand that you're scared to death of feeling anything good because you think you don't deserve it. She stared at him, mouth slightly open. That's not, isn't it? He leaned forward. Tell me, Lona, when's the last time you did something just because it felt good, ate a meal without guilt, laughed without immediately apologizing, let someone be kind to you without suspecting their motives? Stop, she whispered. Martha died in our bed, Caleb said, his voice gentler now. For 6 months, I slept on the floor because I couldn't bear to lie where she'd taken her last breath. Then one night, my back hurt so bad I gave in. And you know what? The world didn't end. She didn't haunt me for it. If anything, I felt closer to her there than I had on the floor. It's not the same. Pain is pain, he said simply. And punishing ourselves doesn't bring them back. It just adds our suffering to theirs. Lona stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I should go. Check on the horses. They're fine. You checked them an hour ago. Then I should. Sit, Caleb said. Please, just sit with me a while. Not because you owe me anything, but because it's a nice evening and the coffee's good and neither of us has to be alone right now. She hovered uncertainly, caught between flight and something else. Finally, slowly, she sank back into the chair. I dream about him, she said after a long silence. Every night. Sometimes he's angry that I couldn't save him. Sometimes he just asks why I didn't come home earlier. What does he say when he's not angry? She looked surprised by the question. Sometimes he tells me about the horses in heaven, says they all have wings and eat clouds instead of hay. A tear slipped down her cheek. He always did have an imagination. Maybe that's the dream you should hold on to, Caleb suggested. The one where he's happy, riding cloud-eating horses. Is that what you do, hold on to the good dreams? I try. Some nights are easier than others. But Martha wouldn't want me dwelling on her last hours when we had years of good ones before that. They sat quietly as full dark settled over the ranch. The owl called again, answered this time by its mate. The sound seemed to stir something in Lona. I haven't told anyone about that night, she said. Not all of it. People in town knew, of course. But I never said it out loud. About Thomas, about the money, about hearing Sammy call for me. How does it feel, having said it? She considered this. Like I've been holding my breath for 2 years and finally remembered how to exhale. That's a start, Caleb said. I'm still leaving when the road's clear, she warned. This doesn't change that. I know. And don't think this means I'm getting attached or anything. I'm just tired. Too tired to keep it all locked up. I understand. She studied him in the lamplight. Do you really? Because most people say they understand and then try to fix you. I'm not most people, Caleb said. And you're not broken. Bent, maybe. Scarred. Definitely. But not broken. Broken things can't feel pain the way you do. They can't love the way you still love that boy. Something shifted in her expression then. A recognition of truth she hadn't expected to find. Thank you, she whispered. Come on, Caleb said, standing. I'll walk you to the barn. They crossed the dark yard together. their footsteps in sync. At the barn door, Lona paused. "Caleb, do you really think they're all right wherever they are?" He thought of Martha, of their unborn child, of all the souls this hard land had claimed. "I think they're at peace," he said finally. "And I think they'd want us to find our own peace in time." She nodded and slipped inside. As Caleb walked back to his empty house, he realized it didn't feel quite as empty as usual. Something had shifted tonight. Some small portion of weight lifted from both their shoulders. It wasn't healing. Not yet. But it was, as he'd said, a start. The morning came too early, bringing with it a crisis that would test them both. Caleb woke to the sound of distressed whinnying from the barn, not the usual morning greetings, but something urgent and wrong. He pulled on his boots and ran outside, finding Lona already in Belle's stall, her face tight with worry. "She's been like this for an hour," Lona said without preamble. "Started pacing. Wouldn't eat. Now look at her." Belle was indeed in distress, her flanks heaving, sweat darkening her coat despite the cool morning air. She kept trying to lie down, then standing again, clearly uncomfortable. "Colic?" Caleb asked, though he could see it was more than that. "Maybe, but there's something else." Lona ran her hands along the mare's swollen sides. "The foal, it's too early, but I think she might be trying to foal." Caleb's heart sank. Belle wasn't due for months yet. A foal born this early had little chance, and they could lose Belle too if things went badly. "What do we do?" Lona was already rolling up her sleeves. "We try to help her through it, keep her calm, walking if she'll tolerate it. If she is foaling early, we need to be ready." She looked at him directly. "This could go badly. Caleb, you need to prepare yourself." He thought of all the losses this ranch had seen, all the graves dotting the hillside. "I'm prepared. Tell me what you need." They worked together through the morning, taking turns walking Belle when she could manage it, letting her rest when she needed to. Lona's knowledge proved invaluable. She knew exactly how to check the mare's progress, when to intervene, and when to let nature take its course. "Where'd you learn all this?" Caleb asked during a brief respite, watching Lona prepare clean cloths and water. "The stable where I worked. The owner's wife was a midwife. She used to say horses and women weren't so different when it came to bringing life into the world. She taught me both trades." A shadow crossed her face. "Came in handy when Sammy was born. Thomas was too drunk to fetch the doctor." By midday, it was clear Belle was indeed in labor, far too early. The mare lay on her side in the straw, breathing hard, her eyes rolling with fear and pain. "Talk to her," Lona instructed Caleb. "Let her know she's not alone." He knelt by Belle's head, stroking her neck and murmuring the same nonsense words he'd used when she was just a filly. Lona positioned herself to help with the delivery, her movements confident despite the circumstances. "I can see hooves," she reported. "That's good, means it's positioned right, but it's so small. Caleb, so terribly small." The next hour was a blur of effort and encouragement. Belle struggled valiantly, and Lona guided the foal with the gentle, experienced hands. When the tiny creature finally slipped free, Caleb's breath caught. It was indeed small, impossibly fragile, but it was moving. "It's alive," he breathed. "Clear its nose," Lona instructed, already turning her attention back to Belle. "Make sure it can breathe." Caleb did as told, his large hands surprisingly gentle with the delicate foal. It was a filly, dark like her mother, with a white star on her forehead. She blinked at him with new eyes, and something in his chest cracked open. But their relief was short-lived. Belle wasn't recovering as she should. She lay too still, her breathing too shallow. "No," Lona whispered, her hands moving over the mare. "No, you don't get to give up now. Your baby needs you." She worked with fierce determination, massaging Belle's abdomen, checking for complications. Caleb watched her transform from the wary, broken woman who'd arrived in the storm to someone entirely different, confident, determined. fighting for life with everything she had. "Come on," she murmured, and Caleb realized she was no longer talking just to Belle. Her eyes were distant, seeing another time, another fight she'd lost. "Please, not again. I can't watch another—" "Lona," Caleb said gently, "you're doing everything right. Whatever happens, you've done everything right." She looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't save him. I couldn't get to him in time." "This isn't then," Caleb said firmly. "You're here now. You're helping now. That's all anyone can do." As if in response to their combined will, Belle's breathing deepened. The mare lifted her head, looking around until she spotted her foal. With effort, she rolled onto her chest, nickering softly. "That's it," Lona encouraged, helping steady the mare. "That's your baby. She needs you." The reunion of mother and foal was tentative at first. The baby was weak, struggling to stand on legs like twigs. But Belle's instincts kicked in, and she began cleaning her foal with gentle determination. "Will they make it?" Caleb asked. "The next 24 hours will tell," Lona said, exhaustion evident in her voice. "The foal needs to nurse soon, needs colostrum, and Belle needs to pass the afterbirth without complications. But," she managed a small smile, "they're both fighters. That's something." They settled in for a long vigil. Caleb fetched blankets and food while Lona refused to leave the stall. As afternoon faded to evening, the foal finally managed to stand on shaky legs and find her mother's milk. "There," Lona breathed. "That's the first hurdle." They sat in the straw, backs against the stall wall, watching mother and baby. The barn was quiet except for the soft sounds of nursing and Belle's contented rumbles. "You saved them," Caleb said. "We saved them," Lona corrected. "And they're not out of danger yet. Still, I've never seen anyone fight for something the way you fought for them today." She was quiet for a long moment. "When Sammy was born, he didn't cry at first. The cord was wrapped around his neck, and he was so blue. The midwife said to prepare myself, but I wouldn't accept it. I breathed for him, rubbed his little chest until he finally gasped." She smiled sadly. "He was always a fighter after that, right until—" "You gave him 6 years," Caleb said softly. 6 years he wouldn't have had without you. Is that supposed to make it easier knowing I saved him once just to lose him later? No, but maybe it means you were always meant to be his mother, to fight for him, to love him, to give him whatever time you could." Lona turned to look at him, really look at him. "How did you get to be so wise about loss?" "Not wise," Caleb said, "just experienced. And I had a good teacher. Martha used to say that grief was just love with nowhere to go. The stronger the love, the deeper the grief. But that doesn't mean we should love less." "I'm scared," Lona admitted suddenly. "Sitting here, watching this baby live when I couldn't save mine. I'm scared of feeling anything about it, of caring." "I know. But I already do care. Damn it, I already named her in my head." Caleb smiled. "What did you name her?" "Hope," Lona said, then laughed wetly. "How's that for tempting fate?" "I think it's perfect." They sat quietly as night fell, taking turns checking on Belle and the newly named Hope. The foal grew stronger with each passing hour, her legs steadying, her voice finding strength in tiny whinnies. Around midnight, Lona finally dozed off, her head falling onto Caleb's shoulder. He stayed perfectly still, not wanting to wake her. In the soft lantern light, with the peaceful sounds of horses around them and Lona's weight warm against his side, Caleb felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years, a sense of rightness, of being exactly where he needed to be. The foal would need constant care for weeks. Belle would need monitoring. It was a commitment that would keep Lona here longer than the few days she'd agreed to. But watching her sleep, seeing the worry lines smooth from her face, Caleb thought maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Sometimes, he reflected, life had to be coaxed back into broken places, like a premature foal fighting to stand, like a mare determined to nurture despite her weakness. Like two wounded people finding purpose in shared vigil, sometimes the smallest victories were the most profound. Hope nickered softly in her sleep, and Caleb smiled. It was indeed a perfect name, for the foal and for whatever was growing between him and the woman who'd stumbled into his life during a storm. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, hope was enough. The week that followed Belle's crisis passed in a rhythm of careful tending and quiet revelations. Hope grew stronger each day, her spindly legs gaining confidence, her voice growing from weak bleats to demanding whinnies whenever her mother moved too far away. Lona threw herself into their care with a dedication that bordered on obsession, barely leaving the barn except when Caleb physically insisted she eat or rest. On the 7th morning after Hope's birth, Caleb found Lona asleep in the stall again, curled in the straw with one hand resting on the foal's side. Hope had tucked herself against Lona's body, accepting her as naturally as she did her mother. The sight made something twist in Caleb's chest, a pain that wasn't entirely grief. "You can't keep sleeping out here," he said gently when Lona stirred awake. She sat up, straw in her hair, looking disoriented. "I need to be here if they need something." "They're past the worst of it. You said so yourself yesterday." He offered her a hand up. "Come on, breakfast is ready, and you're going to eat it at a table like a civilized person." She accepted his help reluctantly, brushing straw from Martha's borrowed dress. Over the past week, she'd stopped mentioning leaving once the roads cleared. The roads had been passable for 3 days now, but neither of them had brought it up. At breakfast, Caleb set a plate of eggs and biscuits in front of her, along with fresh coffee. She ate mechanically at first, then with growing appetite. "I've been thinking," she said suddenly. "Hope's going to need special attention for months, supplements to her mother's milk, careful monitoring of her growth, and Belle still needs watching." "That's true," Caleb agreed neutrally. "And you can't do it alone, not with all the other ranch work." "Also true." She set down her fork, meeting his eyes directly for the first time in days. "I could stay, just until she's stronger, until you don't need the help anymore." Caleb kept his expression carefully neutral, though his heart was racing. "And then I'll go." But the words lacked the conviction they'd held a week ago. "I mean it. This is just practical. You need help. I have the skills. It's a business arrangement." "Of course," he said, "though I'd insist on paying you fair wages. Can't have you working for just room and board. I don't want your money. And I won't have you working for free. Take it or leave it. But those are my terms." She studied him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You're not as easygoing as you pretend to be, are you?" "Martha used to say I was stubborn as a mule when I set my mind to something." Smart woman. Lona picked up her fork again. "Fine, fair wages. And I stay until Hope doesn't need special care anymore. But I sleep in the tack room, and we keep things professional." "Whatever makes you comfortable." Caleb agreed, though professional seemed like an odd word for two people who'd already shared so much pain and truth. They settled into a new routine over the following days. Lona took primary responsibility for the horses while Caleb handled the cattle and repairs. They met for meals, sharing the work of cooking and cleaning without discussion, falling into the kind of easy partnership that usually took years to develop. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold, Lona surprised him by speaking about her past without prompting. "I grew up in Kansas," she said, eyes on the horizon. "My father was a minister, fire and brimstone type, saw sin everywhere he looked. My mother tried to soften him, but she died when I was 10. After that," she shrugged. "He got worse. Said I had too much of my mother in me, too much softness. That's why I started working at the stables. Anything to be out of that house." "Is he still alive?" "Don't know. Don't care. I left home at 16, married Thomas because he promised to take me far away. Turned out I just traded one kind of hardness for another. She pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself small. Sometimes I wonder if I'm cursed to repeat the same mistakes. Trust the wrong people, lose everything, run away. You're not running now, Caleb pointed out. No, she agreed quietly. I'm not, and that terrifies me more than anything. Why? She turned to look at him. Because I'm starting to remember what it feels like to be happy. Little moments. Hope trying to race around the paddock on those silly legs. Belle nickering when she sees me coming. You making terrible jokes over dinner. I catch myself smiling, and then I remember. Her voice broke. I remember that I don't get to keep good things. Caleb wanted to reach for her, to offer comfort, but he kept his hand still. Maybe that was true once, doesn't mean it's true forever. You don't know. I know you're not the same woman who lost her son 2 years ago, he interrupted gently. Just like I'm not the same man who lost his wife 3 years back. We're different people now, shaped by grief but not defined by it. Maybe those people get to have different stories. She was quiet for a long moment. When did you start believing that? About 10 days ago, he admitted. When a half-drowned woman showed up at my gate and reminded me that sharing pain makes it lighter. I didn't mean to. I know. That's what made it work. He stood, stretching. Come on, let's check on our girls before full dark. They walked to the barn together, the evening air cool and sweet with the scent of prairie grass. Hope was practicing her prancing, making Belle look on with maternal patience. The foal spotted them and came to the fence on increasingly steady legs, looking for the treats Lona usually brought. Spoiled already, Caleb observed as Lona produced a piece of carrot from her pocket. She deserves some spoiling, Lona said, laughing as Hope lipped at her fingers. Look how far she's come. You both have, Caleb said quietly. Lona looked at him sharply, but there was no judgment in his expression, just warm acknowledgement. I suppose we have. She agreed. They stood there as stars began to appear overhead, watching the horses settle for the night. Lona's hand rested on the fence rail, and Caleb covered it with his own. She didn't pull away. I'm still scared, she whispered. I know. But maybe staying scared is just another way of being stuck in the past. Maybe it is. She turned her hand palm up, intertwining their fingers. I can't promise anything. I can't promise I won't panic and run. I can't promise I'm ready for whatever this is becoming. I'm not asking for promises, Caleb said. Just presence. Just choosing to stay. One day at a time. One day at a time, she repeated, testing the words. I think I can try that. They stood hand in hand as full darkness fell. Two people who'd learned the hard way that tomorrow was never guaranteed. But tonight they had the soft breathing of horses, the vast prairie sky, and the tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd found something worth staying for. When they finally parted for the night, Lona heading to her tack room and Caleb to his empty house, both spaces felt less lonely than before. Change was coming, slow and careful as a premature foal learning to run, and for the first time in years, neither of them was facing it alone. Summer settled over the ranch like a warm blanket, bringing with it long days and gentle evenings. Hope had grown strong and bold, racing around the paddock with the boundless energy of youth, while Belle watched with indulgent patience. Nearly 2 months had passed since that storm-torn night when Lona first appeared at the gate, and the ranch had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The most obvious change was in the small touches wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table, curtains sewn from fabric Caleb had bought in town, a vegetable garden taking shape behind the house. But the deeper changes were in the rhythms of daily life, the easy companionship that had developed between them, the way the house no longer echoed with emptiness. On this particular morning, Caleb was repairing a harness in the barn when he heard Lona's voice carrying across the yard. She was actually singing as she worked in the garden. He couldn't make out the words, but the melody was light and sweet, something about summer roses and morning dew. "You're in a good mood," he observed when she came in for water, dirt under her nails and a smudge on her cheek. "The tomatoes are coming in," she said, as if that explained everything. "Real ones, not those sad things from the general store. And the beans are climbing like they're racing the corn." "Martha always said there was something healing about growing things," Caleb offered, testing the waters of shared memory, instead of the shadow that usually crossed her face at such mentions. Lona smiled. She was right. There's something about planting a seed and watching it become something more. Makes you believe in second chances. They were standing close in the barn's dim interior, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her gray eyes, the way the summer sun had brought out freckles across her nose. Without thinking, he reached up to brush the dirt from her cheek. She caught his hand, but didn't push it away. "Caleb." "I know," he said. "One day at a time, I'm not pushing." "That's the problem," she said softly. "You're not pushing, and it's making it harder to keep my distance." "Why do you need to keep your distance?" She released his hand but didn't step back. "Because I'm starting to want things I thought I'd never want again. Starting to imagine futures instead of just surviving present moments." "What kind of futures?" "Dangerous ones," she whispered. "Ones where I wake up in a real bed instead of a tack room. Ones where I plant gardens knowing I'll see them harvest. Ones where—" She stopped, shaking her head. "Ones where you let yourself be happy," Caleb finished. "It feels like betrayal," she admitted. "Being happy when Sammy never got the chance to grow up. When he never got to see the garden we talked about planting, or the horses he wanted to ride." Caleb thought carefully before responding. "Do you think Sammy would want you to be miserable forever? That little boy who caught fireflies and renamed horses, would he want his mama to never smile again?" Tears gathered in her eyes. "No, he'd probably scold me for being silly. He was always telling me not to be sad. Then maybe honoring him means learning to live again, not just survive." She looked at him for a long moment, then surprised them both by stepping forward and resting her forehead against his chest. He brought his arms around her carefully, ready to let go if she tensed, but she only sighed and settled closer. "I'm trying," she murmured against his shirt. "It's just hard to trust that good things can last." "They don't always," he said honestly. "But that doesn't mean we shouldn't enjoy them while we have them." They stood that way for several minutes, holding each other in the barn's quiet sanctuary. Outside, Hope whinnied for attention, and Belle answered with maternal reassurance. The world went on, but for this moment, they were still. Finally, Lona pulled back, wiping her eyes. "The vegetables need water," she said, but she was smiling. "And I need to finish this harness," Caleb agreed, but neither of them moved immediately. "Sunday's the church social," Lona said suddenly. "In town. I heard Mrs. Patterson talking about it at the general store." "It is," Caleb confirmed, wondering where this was going. "Would you, that is, do you usually go?" "Haven't been since Martha passed. Didn't see the point of socializing when I had nothing social to say. And now," he looked at her, this woman who'd brought life back to his ranch and light back to his days. "Now I might have reasons to go, if I had company." "I haven't been to church since Sammy," she warned. "Might burst into flames at the door." "I'll bring water just in case." She laughed, the sound bright as morning. "All right then, Sunday. But I'm warning you, I only have the one nice dress, and it's been mended so many times it's more thread than fabric. You could wear a feed sack and still be the prettiest woman there." She blushed, actually blushed, and Caleb felt like he'd won a prize. "Flatterer, go fix your harness before I forget all my sensible reservations." She left, but the warmth of her presence lingered. Caleb worked with renewed energy, whistling the same tune she'd been singing, It felt good to have plans, to look forward to something beyond the next day's chores. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, fresh vegetables from the garden, bread Lona had baked that afternoon, cold buttermilk from the spring house, Caleb noticed she'd done something different with her hair, pinning it up in a way that showed the graceful line of her neck. "You look nice," he said, then felt foolish for the simple words. "It's cooler this way," she said, but he caught her pleased smile. They talked about inconsequential things, Hope's latest mischief, the fence that needed mending in the far pasture, whether the rain would hold off until after hay cutting. But underneath the ordinary words was something new, a current of possibility that hadn't been there before. After dinner, instead of retreating immediately to the tack room, Lona suggested they sit on the porch. "It's too nice to be inside," she said. They sat in the 2 rocking chairs Caleb had built years ago, watching fireflies begin their evening dance. The sight made Lona catch her breath. "Sammy would have loved this," she said, but it wasn't with the broken grief of before. He'd be out there right now with a jar, convinced he could catch them all. "Tell me more about him," Caleb invited. "The good memories." So she did. Stories tumbling out like water, finally finding its course. How he'd tried to teach the chickens to march in formation. How he'd been convinced that carrots would make him see in the dark, like horses did. How he'd made up elaborate stories about the adventures of the stable cats. "He sounds like he was full of life," Caleb said when she paused. "He was. Sometimes I forget that. Get so caught up in how he died that I forget how brightly he lived." She turned to look at him. "Thank you for helping me remember." "You've helped me too," Caleb said. "This place was just somewhere to exist before you came. Now it feels like a home again." "Caleb," she began, then stopped. He saw her gather her courage. "That morning you asked me to stay. I was so angry. I thought you were just another man trying to control me, to trap me." "I know. But you weren't. You were offering me freedom, the freedom to stop running." She reached across the space between their chairs, taking his hand. "I'm glad I stayed." "So am I," he said, squeezing gently. They sat hand in hand as darkness fell completely, the fireflies creating their own constellation close to Earth. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own fears to face. But tonight, on this porch, with the summer air soft around them and hope growing as surely as the garden, they had found something worth protecting. "I should go in," Lona said eventually, though she made no move to release his hand. "You could stay," Caleb said quietly. "In the house. I mean, your own room. No expectations, just closer." She was quiet so long he thought he'd overstepped. Then, one step at a time. "As slow as you need. Maybe next week, after the social, after we see how it feels to be us in front of other people." "Fair enough." She stood, leaning down to kiss his cheek before he could react. "Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Lona." He watched her cross to the barn, no longer hunched against invisible storms, but walking tall, with purpose. When she turned back at the door to wave, he waved back, feeling like a young man courting for the first time. Change was coming, steady and sure as the seasons, and for 2 people who'd thought their best days were behind them, the future was beginning to look remarkably bright. The day after the church social started like any other, with morning chores and shared breakfast. But there was a new ease between them, born from the previous day's public acknowledgement of their connection. The townspeople had been surprised but welcoming, and Mrs. Patterson had even pulled Lona aside to say how nice it was to see Caleb smiling again. Lona was in the garden, humming as she worked, when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her freeze. That particular gait, the heavy-handed way of riding, she knew it before she even looked up. Her blood turned to ice water in her veins. Well, a rough voice called out. "Took me long enough to track you down. Lona, you always were good at disappearing." Thomas's brother, Jake Hartley, sat his horse like he owned the world, the same cruel twist to his mouth that his brother had worn. Behind him were two other men, trail-worn and hard-eyed. "Jake," Lona said, straightening slowly, trying to keep the fear from her voice. "What are you doing here?" "Come to collect what's mine," he said, dismounting with deliberate slowness. "Tommy owed me money when he died. Considerable money. Way I figure it. His debts passed to his widow." "I don't have any money," Lona said, backing toward the house. "No, living pretty comfortable here, seems to me." His eyes raked over the garden, the well-maintained buildings, finally landing on her with a possessive gleam. "Maybe we can work out another arrangement. You come with me, nice and quiet-like, and we'll call the debt square." "I'm not going anywhere with you." Jake's face darkened. "Now, Lona, Tommy always said you had too much spine for your own good. Shame he never broke you of that habit. But I've got time." "The lady said she's not going anywhere." Caleb's voice was calm, almost conversational, but Lona saw Jake's men straighten in their saddles. Caleb stood in the barn doorway, relaxed but ready, his hand resting casual-like on his hip near his gun belt. "This ain't your concern, friend," Jake said. "This is between me and my sister-in-law." "Everything on my land is my concern," Caleb replied, moving to stand beside Lona. "And the lady is under my protection." Jake laughed, ugly and knowing. "Your protection that what they're calling it now, Tommy always said she'd spread her legs for anyone who—" "That's enough." Caleb's voice had gone deadly quiet. "You'll watch your tongue, or you'll lose it." "Big talk for one man against three." "I've faced worse odds." Caleb's hand hadn't moved, but something in his stance shifted, and suddenly he looked dangerous in a way that made Jake's men exchange glances. "Besides, you're assuming you'd get to your guns before I put you down. At this range, with your hand that far from your weapon, I wouldn't bet on it." Jake studied him, calculation replacing bravado. "You willing to die for another man's used goods?" "I'm willing to kill to protect what's mine," Caleb corrected. "And make no mistake, this ranch, everyone on it, that's mine to protect. You can ride out now, forget you ever found her, or we can settle this permanent-like, your choice." The moment stretched taut as fence wire. Lona could hear her heart thundering, could see Jake's hand twitch toward his gun. Then one of his men spoke up. "Jake, this ain't worth it. We came for money, not a fight." Jake's face twisted with rage, but he was outnumbered by practicality. "This ain't over," he snarled. "She owes a debt, and I mean to collect." "Any debt she might have owed died with your brother," Caleb said. "But if you need it legal-like, I'll buy the debt from you. Name a fair price." Jake named a figure that made Lona gasp more than she could earn in 5 years. "Done," Caleb said without hesitation. "I'll have the bank draft ready tomorrow. You can collect it in town, with witnesses. After that, you have no claim on her, legal or otherwise. Are we clear?" Jake looked between them, his face ugly with thwarted plans. "Crystal clear, but you just bought yourself a world of trouble, mister. Hope she's worth it." "She is," Caleb said simply. Jake mounted his horse with sharp movements. "Tomorrow, then, have my money ready." He looked at Lona one more time. "You always did think you were too good for us, Hartleys. Guess you found someone fool enough to believe it." They watched the 3 men ride off, dust rising in their wake. Only when they were specks on the horizon did Lona's knees give out. Caleb caught her, holding her as she shook. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I'm so sorry. I never thought he'd find me. Now you're in debt because of me, and I can never repay." "Hush," Caleb said gently. "It's just money." "It's not just money, it's your savings, your security." "It's a small price for your freedom," he interrupted. "And for my peace of mind." She pulled back to look at him. Why would you do this for me?" "You know why," he said quietly. "Caleb, I won't be bought. I won't be owned by anyone, not even—" "I'm not buying you," he said firmly. "I'm buying your freedom. there's a difference. Tomorrow, after I pay Jake, you'll owe nobody nothing. You'll be free to stay or go as you choose, same as always. And if I choose to go, pain flashed in his eyes, but his voice stayed steady. Then I'll wish you well and remember fondly the time we had. And if I choose to stay, then we'll continue as we have been, one day at a time, building something together because we want to, not because we have to. Lona studied his face. This good man who just spent a fortune to keep her safe without asking for anything in return. I don't understand you, she whispered. It's simple, Caleb said. I love you. Have for a while now. That doesn't obligate you to anything, doesn't change our arrangement. It's just the truth. The words hung between them like morning mist. Lona's eyes filled with tears. I don't know if I can love again. Not the way you deserve. I'm not asking you to. I'm just telling you where I stand. So there's no confusion. He touched her face gently. Now, let's get you inside. You're shaking. They went into the house, Caleb making tea while Lona sat at the table, trying to process everything that had just happened. When he set the cup in front of her, she caught his hand. I do care for you, she said, more than I thought I could care for anyone again. It's just... I know, he said. You don't have to explain, and you don't have to decide anything today. Jake's dealt with. That's what matters. What if he comes back? What if he doesn't take the money? Then I'll deal with that too. His voice was calm, certain. You're not alone anymore. Lona, whatever comes, we'll face it together. If you choose to stay. She was quiet for a long moment, sipping her tea. Through the window, she could see Hope prancing in the paddock, strong and healthy and alive. The garden flourished in the afternoon sun. The house around them felt warm and safe and real. I choose to stay, she said softly. Not because I owe you, not because I'm scared to leave, but because when I think about tomorrow, I can't imagine it without you. That's enough, Caleb said. That's more than enough. The next day, they went to town together. Jake took the bank draft with ill grace, but took it, signing papers that freed Lona from any claim. When it was done, they walked out of the bank into bright sunshine. It's finished, Lona said, almost disbelieving. I'm actually free. You always were, Caleb said. Now it's just official. She stopped in the middle of the street, turned to face him. Caleb McAllister, I don't have fancy words or grand promises. I'm still broken in places, still scared of losing what I love. But if you'll have me, flaws and fears and all, I'd like to try building a life with you. A real life, not just surviving. Is that a proposal? He asked, smiling. Maybe it is. Then my answer is yes. Right there in the middle of Main Street, with half the town watching, Lona rose up on her toes and kissed him. Not a goodbye kiss this time, not gratitude or fear or obligation, just love, simple and true and strong enough to build a future on. When they finally parted, Mrs. Patterson was dabbing at her eyes and several men were whistling appreciatively. Lona blushed but didn't step away from Caleb's embrace. Let's go home, she said. Home, Caleb repeated, liking the sound of it. Yes, let's. They climbed into the wagon together, Hope's namesake emotion filling the space between them. The road stretched ahead, dusty and long, but they'd travel it together. And for two people who'd thought their best days were behind them, that was nothing short of a miracle. As they rode toward the ranch, toward their future, Lona slipped her hand into Caleb's. No more running, she said. No more silence, he replied. And in a land that had taken so much from both of them, they'd found something worth holding on to each other. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, loss, and redemption in the Old West. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts about Caleb and Lona's journey. If you enjoyed this tale, Please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help more people discover these frontier stories of the heart. Until next time, partners.